Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, what is gaslighting and what is the origin of the term? So to answer this question, I'll be using an article that was published in the Los Angeles Review of Books. This isn't a scholarly article, but it was written by an English professor named Johnson, and it was published in 2017. So to start with, gaslighting is a term that refers to an individual trying to convince another individual that they've lost touch with reality. So just to describe this more accurately, I'm going to use a person A, person B type scenario. So it's when person A tries to convince person B that person B has lost touch with reality or has mental health symptoms that person B does not have. Usually it's conceptualized as a husband or wife, but it doesn't have to be. It can be romantic partners, it can be friends. It doesn't even have to be necessarily one person and one other person. It could be one person and many people. Now, it's a type of manipulation, and it's usually thought of as cognitive, emotional, or psychological. Now, the origin of the term actually is quite curious. There's a lot of different videos out there on YouTube and a lot of different articles have been written, again, not scholarly articles, but articles have been written about the origin, but there's a lot of mistakes that have been made in regard to where this term came from. Several of the origin stories for this term are based on a 1944 movie titled Gaslight, and some are based on a 1938 play with the same name. But as you'll see, the way that gaslighting is described doesn't really line up too well with the play or the movie. And this, I think, is why this term is misunderstood sometimes. Now, in the 1944 movie Gaslight, we see a husband and wife, and the husband is a criminal, specifically a killer, and he's trying to convince the wife that she's insane by saying that she's wrong about observations of a flickering gaslight. I'll talk more about what a gaslight is in a moment. Now, we see here that there's other things he does as well, like he hides items and then acts like she must have lost those items. So he does other behavior that would be considered to be manipulative. But this element of the gaslight is really crucial to how we understand the term now. That specifically, the wife was referring to changes in the gaslight, and the husband invalidated those perceptions. So the problem here is this isn't accurate. Now, it's been a long time since I've seen this movie, but again, I mentioned this article written by Johnson earlier, and she has the same observations. I don't remember in the movie where the gaslight was really a part of the manipulation. But I'm going to explain more about the origins of the term, and I'll get to that discrepancy in a moment. So when we look at this term gaslight, we first have to understand what a gaslight is. So a gaslight is a light that's fueled by gas, and it was used in residential and commercial structures. Now, of course, they've all been replaced, or mostly replaced, by electrical lights. But the concept is really similar. There's a flow of gas that goes to the lights. They're the fuel. That's why the lights can illuminate. And we see the same thing with electricity. Electricity flows to lights, and that's why they can illuminate. Now, the plot device here is that the gas lights, when they're on the same network, if you have some that are on and some that are off, when the others are activated, all of them will dim because now the gas is spread over more lights. The same thing can happen with electricity. If you add a lot of new items, if you turn on a lot of items in a house, you could see the lights dim. And that's what we're really talking about here as the plot device in the 1938 play and again in the movie. But this plot device actually originated in a 1930 novel written by Bruce Hamilton. And this novel had this gaslight as being something that allowed somebody to discover what was really going on in the book. Now, Bruce Hamilton's brother is named Patrick Hamilton, and he, with permission, borrowed this plot device and used it in a 1938 play named Gaslight. And this eventually leads to the 1944 movie that's popular. Also, it led to a 1940 movie that was less popular. So this would be a good time to issue a spoiler alert for the 1938 play, which I think would be unlikely that too many people would see now, but also for the 1944 movie, which of course some people could still see. Now, we see that in the play, the husband was a criminal, and he was trying to convince the wife that she was not really understanding reality, that she was kind of becoming insane or losing her faculties in general. So really very similar to what we see in most of the origin stories here for the term gaslighting. Now he was doing this because he was searching the upper floor of the building they were staying in for jewels. That's what we see in the 1938 play. And we see that he does these different types of manipulation, like hiding her watch and claiming she lost it, flirting with the maid, isolating the wife, and threatening to commit her to what they referred to then as an asylum. So he has all these different manipulation techniques, but the dimming of the gaslight or the flickering of the gaslight wasn't actually a manipulation technique we see in the play. So we moved to the 1944 movie. It was actually quite similar to the play, except the characters were wealthier and some of the other plot items were changed a little bit. But again, we see a husband and a wife essentially in the same dynamic. But again, the gaslight is never discussed. The change in brightness of the gaslight is never discussed between the characters in the movie. They never have an argument about the brightness of the gaslight. Now certainly the dimming of the gaslight is alarming and anxiety-provoking to the wife in the movie. So what was happening was he was searching for the crown jewels here in the 1944 movie in an upstairs apartment. He had murdered the owner of those jewels some years before. And when he turned on the gas lights upstairs, they illuminated and all of the lights dimmed on the lower level. And she was noticing this, the wife was noticing this. And this was actually a mechanism that allowed her to escape the manipulation. So this wasn't a type of manipulation. He didn't intend for her to make those observations. This was something she did and then put the pieces together and figured out what he was up to. So really the gaslight led to an escape from the husband, an escape from the manipulation. So we see here some misunderstandings of the origin of the term, and of course the movie was named Gaslight. So even though this wasn't a plot device that's interpreted correctly, it still makes sense that this is used to refer to this type of manipulation. So now that we understand the origin, what are some characteristics of this type of manipulation we refer to as gaslighting? Well, usually this happens from a male to a female. It doesn't have to, but that's commonly what we see. And oftentimes, as I mentioned, a husband, wife, or romantic partners. Also, I indicated this, it's usually one-on-one. So one person can gaslight many people, and theoretically many people can gaslight one, but we usually think of this as more of a deliberate manipulation of one person, not something that's a expansive criminal enterprise or expansive manipulation attempt, but rather between two people in an interpersonal and usually a fairly close relationship. It's conceptualized as long-term, gradual, and it can have the individual who's the victim of gaslighting having trouble determining what's true from what's false, questioning reality, questioning morality, like right from wrong, and questioning sanity. And this is done through lying, dismissing one's perception or belief as invalid, isolation, and preventing access to information that would contradict what the gaslighter wants the individual to believe. So there's a lot of different tactics that are used as part of the manipulation strategy. The goal here is to shake confidence, lower self-esteem, and make an individual dependent on another individual, make the individual who's being gaslighted dependent on the gaslighter. So this brings me to the relationship between gaslighting and narcissism. Almost all the time when we see the term gaslighting, we see some reference to narcissism, pathological narcissism, grandiose or vulnerable narcissism, or narcissistic personality disorder. And I think that one of the reasons there's a strong association is because manipulation is actually a key component of narcissism, and specifically exploiting individuals interpersonally. So it does seem to have a fairly close relationship to narcissism, but you could also make an argument it has a fairly close relationship to psychopathy. Psychopathy also has a manipulation component, although oftentimes it's considered less personal than what we would see with narcissism. It's important to note here that anybody can engage in the activity of gaslighting. Somebody doesn't have to be psychopathic, sociopathic, they don't have to have antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, or even be narcissistic. It's just this term gaslighting has become associated with narcissism. It's not that it has to be committed by an individual who is narcissistic. Another important point here about gaslighting is it's not something you really find in the scientific literature. You won't find it in the research literature. You will find a lot about manipulation, and in particular, interpersonal manipulation. But the term gaslighting really isn't a scientific term. It's more of a colloquial term. So when we look at the research literature and we don't really find anything about gaslighting, that's because it's just referred to by different names. And it doesn't mean the construct of gaslighting doesn't exist. It's just a way we study it. It's just the terms we use when we study these constructs. So one thing we can take away from the origin story of the term gaslighting and the construct of gaslighting in general is if someone is experiencing gaslighting, if they're the victim of gaslighting, it may be helpful to remember the origin as we see it in the 1938 play and the 1944 movie. The observation and the changes of brightness in the gaslight, that was evidence that helped the victim to break free of the manipulation. So I think that's a good takeaway considering how negative gaslighting is, how destructive it is. If we look at the origin of the term, the gaslighting, specifically looking at that gaslight and critically evaluating that evidence, was really helpful. That was what was meaningful and freeing for the victim. So really what we're looking at here is if you're being fed false information, it's important to stay connected to other sources of information. You may not know at first the information is false, you may not know you're being gaslighted, but if you use multiple sources of information and critically evaluate those sources, you have a better chance of uncovering the manipulation behavior than if you rely on just one person and what they're telling you. So an important lesson I think really can be learned from the origin of gaslighting. I hope you found this description of the term gaslighting and its origin to be interesting. Thanks for watching.